Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and in the comments to my videos some of you have asked me to talk about my favorite books of all times or the best books from the top 10s I film at the end of each year, and that is a very difficult list to make because of course the reading experiences and your preferences in literature are a very fluid thing, because of course every book you read is read in the light of all other books you've ever read, so that sometimes you will read a new book and it will enlighten or make you change your mind about another book you maybe love, you maybe have read several years before. That's the importance of intertextuality in the reading experience. Books are in some kind of continuous discussion with each other, and sometimes listening to what a book has to say will make you change your mind about your opinion on another book. But then I thought, no, Mattia, what are you talking about? Your favorite books are very much set in stone, and I don't know if that says something bad about me as a reader. These are the proverbial books I would take with me on a desert island. And as much as I love discovering new narratives and I always want to discover new writers and read new books, part of me would really just like to read these books in a loop forever, or even just to take the last book I'm going to mention and reread it for the rest of my life and fuck the rest. Anyway, these are my favorite books. These are the books that every time I pick them up, because I need to find a reference or because I need to move them to another shelf or whatever the fuck, I can't help but reread at least a part of them. Sometimes I'm usually obsessed with endings, sometimes it's the beginning, sometimes it's a favorite passage in the middle, whatever. The first one is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which is also the most recent among my favorite books. I mean, the one I read most recently. I read it last year. And this is something weird. The books, my favorite books, are not necessarily the most enjoyable reading experiences I've ever had. And for instance, with The Name of the Rose, some of the historical passages and some of the dense political discussions about medieval politics, I found them impossibly heavy. But all the discussions on literature and on the importance and nature of fiction and on the reasons why we read, they resonated with me in a very stimulating way, and that's why I can't help rereading so much of it every time I pick it up. Moreover, I'm a complete sucker for lost manuscripts and lost books, and the idea of, you know, the narrative of The Name of the Rose as a found manuscript which mysteriously appears as it doesn't exist even though Eco found it at one point, and the whole preface by Eco at the beginning of the book just pushes all of the right buttons for me. Whereas the first paragraph of the prologue, the part written by Azzo, is among the most beautiful prose written in Italian I've ever encountered, and it, taps into that whole idea you find in the Divine Comedy of talking about the evil of the world as a way of reaching enlightenment, and as a consequence, that idea of literature as a way of making sense of a world that might or might not make sense in the first place, which I found incredibly beautiful. And the Divine Comedy, the Inferno, is also a text I reread very often, but that's poetry and it's neither here nor there, so I'm not going to talk about it. Moving on, The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz, which is probably the one book among the ones I'm going to talk about which I would call a perfect book. Again, Name of the Rose, all the historical passages, the dense reflections, philosophical and religious reflections, I couldn't really be bothered to fully appreciate them, but with Oscar Wilde this is basically a perfect score, whatever that means. It's written in a unique voice and narrated by an incredible narrator, and it is so impossibly fun and so terribly sad, and the story of the life of this main character, of Oscar de Leon, is so beautifully heartbreaking, and it's a great story of obsession and redemption and isolation and love. And the story of the Dominican Republic, which is intertwined with his personal story, has a great epic scope. And when I first reread The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, I couldn't believe how short it was, because this reads like a breeze and you can really read it in a few days, but it has the scope and the importance and the import of a 600-page novel. And I'm an impossibly huge nerd, and all the references to nerd culture and the story of this ostracized geek, again, they pushed all of the right buttons, and this couldn't but become one of my favorite books. And if that's not enough, if you are that kind of close reader, or, you know, if you have that kind of frame of mind that an English degree tends to give you, you can spend your life analyzing this book and, you know, analyzing the narrator and the way he approaches the narrated facts and whether the narrator can be reliable at all times, and whether he, the way he presents the story of Oscar Wilde is sympathetic or not. There's so much to say about this book. This is really an endless source of discussion points, of reflection, and again, we're back at the beginning, it's an impossibly good story. I'd recommend it to anybody out there. Some Thomas Pynchon now. I love Thomas Pynchon. He's another author who writes the kind of books that always have something to tell you, and every time you reread them you notice some other genius thing, a genius reference or intratextual reference between all the books he's written, or some external reference to another work of literature. And all of that is beautiful, but at the same time he writes such compelling and thrilling stories behind the occasionally difficult prose he uses. And for that reason I am very much a fan of the second part of his production, from Mason and Dixon onward. Not as... I mean, I love all of his books, but I'm not as obsessed with his early ones as I am with his late ones. And the two books I, you know, carry with me on that proverbial desert island are Bleeding Edge and Against the Day. I love Bleeding Edge because it has so much heart, and the mystery, the unsolved mystery at its core, the many unsolved mysteries at its core are so compelling. And again, just as much as Oscar Wilde, if not a bit more, this is a very nerdy book with lots of references to nerd culture and 90s popular culture. And again, all of that is terribly compelling to me, and reading a book where the characters discuss, I don't know, Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z, that's amazing to me. It speaks to me directly. And Against the Day, on the other hand, is an impossibly epic story. It's maybe the best story I've ever read, if we take, you know, the story outside of the style and the narrative and the length and all that, which is something you can do and shouldn't do, but if we do that for some kind of nerdy exercise, the story of this story that spans so many decades and deals with these guys on a flying ship who start doubting whether the guys who are giving them orders are as well intentioned as they thought at the beginning. It has the kind of epic scope combined with a close attention to characters and that kind of humor mixed with tragedy. It has that same import as the great stories I loved growing up. Full Metal Alchemist, the manga series, the great Final Fantasies 7 and 8 if you ask me. It's that kind of epic scope in the form of a novel you can keep rereading until you die. Among my favorite books are, of course, the books of Michael Chabon. I often say on my channel that he is my favorite writer, and he really is. He definitely is my favorite living writer, and the reason why I love his fiction so much is, in a way, I think, the same reason why I love the music of the Beatles, for instance, so much. Why I think everyone loves the Beatles so much. It's not that is, you know, the Beatles, it's not like they are the most technical group, it's not like they are necessarily the catchiest, it's the chemistry of all the elements. It's, you know, they don't have necessarily the best lyrics or the cleverest lyrics. Their sound is not the edgiest or most experimental or most varied, even though it's very varied. It's the chemistry of all the elements, it's all those things put together. That's it with Michael Chabon for me. It's not that he is, you know, he writes the best sentences, even though I could frame most of the sentences I find in my favorite books of his. It's not that he has the best plots, even though his plots are compelling and amazing. It's just that the balance of all the elements is perfect. It really is. And among his books, my favorite ones are the Yiddish Policeman Union, The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, and which features Chabon's signature. That's his autograph. It's nice. And I was very excited when he signed the book because he put the golden key on the front, and I was like, oh, he put the golden key, but then my girlfriend told me that he put the golden key on all the books he signed, and that was a bit disappointing. And also Munglo. Munglo is among my favorite books of his. It came out very recently, but I wouldn't hesitate to put it among his best, and it features some heartbreaking reflection on the state of the world and on the nature and need for storytelling in our lives. Telegraph Avenue and Summerland, and definitely the August Van Zorn horror stories, I would also rank them among the best of his fiction, and I would also take them with me on that motherfucking island. Now, all of this is nice and well, but if you ask me about the very top of my list, by the way, these books aren't ranked in any way, I put them on the more or less on the same level. If you ask me about my favorite book of all times, I'd have to mention two titles, and the first one would definitely be You Can Scare Me by R.L. Stine. It's going to look like I'm shitting you because I'm mentioning a Goosebumps books, a kids books. I'm not. This is the be-all, end-all of human fiction, if you ask the book chemist. I was obsessed with the Goosebumps books when I was 12, I'm still obsessed with them now as a 20-whatever person, but I didn't put the whole of the series in this position because I think You Can't Scare Me is on a different level, is one step higher than the rest of R.L. Stine's books. It is his masterpiece. It features the same kind of balance between goofy humor and adventure and the idea of danger on the horizon as the rest of the books of the series, but it handles all those elements in a way that is much more subtle. And it delivers some amazing reflections on the nature of monsters and why we are so fascinated with monsters and on why we need monsters in the first place, which you can really extend to why we need horror fiction in our lives and to why we need literature, period, in our lives. And we are back at The Name of the Rose, we're back at Dante's Inferno, and at the idea that in order to access the good things of life and to access meaning, you need to go through all the horrible things the world has to offer. And this is not the kind of idea you can summarize in a YouTube video. You need to, read literature to access it, and this is a great starting point. I read it when I was 12 and it was the best reading experience of my life, and to this day it has not been beaten by any book I've ever read. No book has ever gone close, except maybe for the stories of the author I'm going to talk about in a second. By the way, You Can't Scare Me is not a very good title. The Italian title is, the translated title is La Notte dei Mostri di Fango, which is A Night of the Mud Monsters, which makes the book so much awesome. What can you do? Finally, the one book I could really just keep rereading for the rest of my life is whatever edition of H.P. Lovecraft's collected stories. H.P. Lovecraft for me is the gate, H.P. Lovecraft is the key. He is the writer I have reread the most in my life. I have the beginning and the ending of some of his stories tattooed on the inside of my eyelids, basically, and I do believe that in the wide arabesques of his fiction there may stand symbolized all the aims and the mysteries of a blindly impersonal cosmos. The balance he strikes between plot and reflection, the way he uses horror and fear and monsters, and the way his fiction problematizes all the horrible shit of the universe, it really, and the way he discusses the importance of fiction in his most imaginative stories, and the importance of, storytelling as a way of accessing a blindly impersonal cosmos. His fiction really is a silver key, and it enlightened, for me, it opened up the rest of literature as a kind of silver key to navigate reality, and for that I'm immensely grateful to this guy. And I just love his fiction so much, and I could just read it for the rest of my life. And do not make the mistake of thinking Lovecraft is just tentacle monsters. He is. Tentacle monsters are an important part of his production, but he has also written amazing straight-up horror stories. And he has written brilliant fantasy fiction, very imaginative, and the tension you find throughout his production between the terrible nihilism of his points of view on the world and the importance and the belief he had in the power of dreams and in the power of the human mind to shape reality and our experience of the cosmos. It's just the right shit for me. These are my favorite books. I'd recommend all of them to anybody out there. The one exception is maybe Pynchon. If you're interested in Pynchon, maybe begin with Inherent Vice, which might be a better introduction into his writing style than the two ones I've mentioned, but Bleeding Edge can be a good introduction to Pynchon too, if you are a 90s kid, especially. As for the others, do read them and love them, because as interesting and as thought-provoking and rewarding as they are, they read like a breeze and they are amazingly enjoyable. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know in the comments if some of these books are among your favorite too, and let me know about your favorite books. And I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.